Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Hey friends, thank you so much again for joining us for this episode. I'm Luke Crawford and I'm here again with my co-host Matt Ma, and we are thrilled to be joined by Mark Galli. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Hey, good to be with you.
If you don't know Mark, he's served in the past as a Presbyterian minister. He's also an author and speaker, has experience as a journalist, and probably is most well known for his role as the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, which he just recently stepped away from. We're really excited today to have the chance to talk about church and culture with Mark, as well as what it looks like to encounter God, and really looking forward to what he has to share with us. But before we get into all those details, Mark, we'd love to get to know you in a better way. We'd love to invite our listeners into just having a thumbnail sketch of who Mark Galli is. So could you take just a few minutes to paint for us a picture of your background, your career, something interesting about you that our listeners may not know?
Yeah. Well, I'm a California boy, although I'm living in the Midwest now. And I've been here for 30 years, so I'm finally able to admit I'm a Midwesterner, whether I like it or not. Born and raised in California, had a very kind of classic evangelical fundamentalist conversion experience when I was in junior high. Went forward to the altar call and a very tearful moment. Although I will say it was a very self-centered moment. The main reason I went forward, I was tired of feeling guilty during the altar call. And I thought if I went forward, then I wouldn't feel guilty after that. But of course, altar calls being what they are, they just make you feel guilty. So what's the amazing thing about that is that even though it didn't work, I felt like I'd made a commitment, and the Lord has kind of had me stick with it since then. Yeah. Off to seminary, graduated from college, seminary, Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. Spent 4.5 years in Mexico City as an associate pastor of an English-speaking church.
Wow.
Doing mostly youth work and Christian education. I will say those were some of the happiest periods of my ministry. Working with youth. Yeah, it was really awesome. I was with a special group of youth. Of course, they were children of diplomats and multinational business people. Mm-hmm. So when you take them out for a, ice cream float or whatever, I mean, they could engage in conversations about foreign affairs like anybody else.
No kidding.
It's kind of fun. Yeah. Then I served a small church in Sacramento for 6 years, Presbyterian church. And then in the middle of that, I started to write as an avocation and writing for a magazine that's no longer in existence, a leadership journal. And I was hoping I would get an invitation by the editor to write a major story or the cover story. And he did phone me one day, but instead he offered me a job. So
wow.
I thought, well, let's give this a shot for a couple of years and see what it's like. And it turned out to be a really good fit. I wasn't a bad pastor, or I didn't hate pastoring. I wasn't great either. I was just a good, solid, small church pastor, and I was grateful for that experience. But when I stepped into journalism, it was like, the old corny cliche. It's like it fit me like a glove. It was a really good match. And so over the years, I actually never asked for a single raise or a promotion, and I just kept on getting promoted. So it was obvious that the Lord wanted me there and had things for me to do. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So as you said, I stepped away. I retired on January 3rd of this year.
Okay.
Some people know me for the controversial editorial I wrote in December of last year on Donald Trump. Some people think I left because of that, but no, my retirement had been planned months in advance. So that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's great. Now, over those 3 decades of journalism, what would you say are the significant trends or defining moments for Western evangelicalism that you've observed over that time?
Well, you tend to observe the things that you're most interested in personally. And of course, I've been, although I've been a student of theology my whole life. As a pastor, of course, I felt it was important for me to know theology well to be able to preach well. And I've dabbled here and there. I've actually wrote a book introducing evangelicals to Karl Barth. Although I wouldn't consider myself a Barthian, I think he's an important theologian that people should know about. And he's an inspiring person to read in many of his passages. But the thing I've noticed is just when I was a young man, in the good old days, the leaders of our movement, of the evangelical movement that I trafficked in, were people like J.I. Packer and John Stott. And the local pastors in California were like Earl Palmer but these were scholar pastors. They were teaching pastors. And then we looked up to these other people. I'd say now the most important qualification for most pastors is that they be entrepreneurs. They know how to build an organization. Yeah, there's obviously, that's a skill that is needed, but it doesn't interest me as much as teaching pastors, which I don't see as many as I used to. And I also noticed it in the journalism. When I first got there, most of the editors were concerned about that the church continue to practice and teach good theology. And in the last 5 to 10 years of my stint there, theology got like a pat on the top of the head. That's a good thing to have. But the real interest had switched to social justice, which again, I have no argument about. But you asked about shifts, and those are the shifts that have taken those. That's one major shift that's taken place.
Wow.
And just as a distinction, when you say social justice, I think on the internet that can oftentimes be considered a left-leaning phenomena. Yeah. Do you see within the church, whether you are a fundamentalist Baptist or the most progressive mainline church, do you see social justice even being a fundamental characteristic of that fundamentalist Baptist church?
But what's interesting is that generally people are conservative evangelicals and fundamentalists who are active in politics. They tend not to frame it in terms of social justice, but really that's what they're after. I mean, if you are trying to work for the saving the lives of children in the womb, that's a justice issue.
Right.
You're worried if you're trying to if you want your country to allow more immigrants to come in the country because they're suffering overseas and this is the only place they can come to, that's a justice issue.
Right.
I suppose real conservative evangelicals in America tend to be very pro-Israel. And you can frame that as a justice issue if that's important to you. So I do think, in one sense, evangelicals' interest in justice began with the conservatives, with the religious right. Again, they didn't frame it like that, but they basically said Christians should be involved in politics. We're in the middle of a culture war, and we should be fighting for the rights of Christians and religious people in general. And we ought to make this country more moral. Well, politics isn't anything but the search for kind of a communitarian justice for everybody. But on the more moderate and progressive side, I've seen more interest in it in the last 10 to 20 years. So that when people come in, and then a real interest in engaging the culture. So I couldn't tell you the number of editors starting in about 2000, starting somewhere around 2000. I would say nearly every person who applied for a job at Christianity Today as an editor said, I'm really interested in the intersection of Christianity and culture, faith and culture, how faith speaks into culture. And that's still a very important element, and with a lot of young people, especially.
Wow.
So those are some trends that are different.
Yeah. Those are keen observations. Thank you. And kind of with that, to segue from that into this question, Mark, what would you say when you look at that interest in culture or social justice or considering how faith is worked out, what would you say is the primary role of the church in culture?
Well, the primary role of church and culture is simply to be a witness, a light for Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the one thing we bring to the community that nobody else brings. Now, of course, that means that some Christians will be involved in racial reconciliation. Some will be involved in immigration. My wife works for World Relief. She's downstairs working at the home, trying to help refugees find work, and or those that have lost work get unemployment benefits, that sort of thing. Christians will be involved in it, and that's one way that we share the light of Christ, by loving the neighbor. Mm-hmm. Gosh, that's one of the two greatest things we're supposed to be about. Mm-hmm. But I think churches make a mistake, and I make this point in the book, and this has been somewhat controversial. And if you guys disagree, let me know. Just come back at me. But I don't think the church. I think the missional movement is a mistake in defining the very essence of the church as if it's being. I'm sorry. Let me say back up. It's a mistake of the missional people, I think, to define the very essence of the church that should be missional. I think the primary focus of the church, its very essence, is its relationship with God in Jesus Christ. And so it's primary, if you're going to talk about some action that it's primarily going to end up emphasizing, it seems to me worship is the big deal. When the community gathers for worship, we are, in a sense, beginning to live in the future world that Christ promises to bring. And when we live together as a community, we are shedding a very small light on what it will be like once Christ comes again. And this type of witness, to point to God, to point to what Christ has done, it's the only thing the church, I should say, of all the things that are happening in our culture, racial reconciliation, politics, immigration, all sorts of reforms, the church is the only one where you're going to hear a message about Jesus Christ. So while we are engaged in all those things, it seems to me that the primary thing we have to offer the world is Jesus Christ. Now, think about it this way. You know, we read the paper every morning, and there's this thing. Guess what happened today? Guess what Donald Trump said today? Idiotic thing Donald Trump said today. Guess what happened in England? What happened with Brexit? Okay, that's all news. It's interesting. Some of the coronavirus is an amazing news, turning everybody's heads. All our heads are spinning. Here's what Christians wake up in the morning and can announce. Did you know that the creator of the universe, who's omniscient, omnipresent, unbounded, became a human being and lived among us? And then we killed him. And he willingly went to the cross and died for us. And then he rose again. That's much more interesting news than how you're going to vote on Brexit or immigration or Donald Trump.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
And that's what we have to offer the world. That doesn't mean that's the only thing we talk about, because people get bored with this. But we got to keep that in our back pocket. That's the biggest thing we have to offer the world.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and I know as I was reading through your most recent book, which for our listeners, it's called When Did We Start Forgetting God? We're going to touch on that a little bit later, but a really thought-provoking read. What came to my mind, Mark, was thinking about how there's so much merit to that, to being a people firstly marked by this deep love and delight in God. But I think what the question I had and what some of our listeners would then ask is, how would you see us knowing and having Jesus Christ informing the way we then participate in missional activities? What would you say that kind of maybe hierarchy of priorities could look like, and how the greatest priority you've just underscored informs those that follow?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is, in some ways, when we engage in the world, we work at the local food closet, or we help teach kids in the afternoon, whatever we do. We're not going to look any different than anyone else, okay? Hopefully we'll be as cheerful and as positive and as uplifting as everyone else is, okay? So in some sense, it won't look any different. I think what's going on inside of us, however, what I'm striving for is that it will be different. So for example, in the simple act of getting in my car to go to the grocery store, I have to drive through tree-lined streets in a very pleasant suburb of Chicago that I live in. It is, I'm trying to take more advantage of those moments to frame that experience, in a sense, with God. Okay, God is the creator of this beautiful, the sun's out today, it's beautiful, it's a warm day, these trees are gorgeous. Here are some people walking down the street, Christ died for them. I mean, this sounds a little pious and corny, and it isn't something like I do every second of the day, but it seems to me my day is better punctuated. It's better when it's punctuated with me just reflecting on how does God frame what's going on right now? What's happening? It doesn't have to take more than 2 or 3 seconds. You don't have to fall on your knees and start speaking in tongues. It's just an awareness.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is then that will help. It helps me realize the end game. So, for example, when I used to volunteer at PADS, which is a homeless shelter, and it's at one level, it's pretty rewarding to wake up, go down, serve breakfast to the guests, help them pack a lunch for them, and get them on their way for the day. That's pretty satisfying. You know. But to remember that that's penultimate. That's the second best thing I can do for a homeless person.
Yeah.
The best thing I can do for a homeless person is to help them navigate themselves toward God in some way.
Yeah.
Now, I may not be able to do that, but I could at least pray for them that they would do that.
Yeah.
Or maybe there will be an opportunity to do that. Again, it doesn't mean that everything we do has to be evangelism, but it does mean that introducing people to Jesus Christ, if that's not the end game, I don't know what we're doing. You know, what the church is. What is the church offering that anybody else is offering? Yeah.
Now, do you think that the church has almost lost that emphasis? You've indicated elsewhere that the church is in crisis, and what do you think is the root of that crisis?
Well, I wrote a whole book about that, so I'm not going to be able to answer that quickly. I think one of the roots of the crisis is, if I can say it, is that the crisis is that we have let activism overtake our devotional life. So, you know, it made great pains to say, of course Christians should be active. Christ did say the second commandment is to love your neighbor.
Yeah.
But it's my impression, based on my own life and based on the life of my friends, that we let activism get in the way of our love of Jesus Christ. And we tend to say, if I love Christ, I will do what he wants me to do. And that's true.
Right.
But it also means I will love him. I will have a heartfelt passion and desire for him. And I'll be the first to admit that heartfelt passion comes and goes, mostly goes. Yeah. And when it's there, it's not that big. And so one of my kind of goals in my life is to help grow that, so that there is a sense of passion, that I would feel as in love with Jesus as I do with my wife, hopefully more. You know? But I think one of the reasons we've gotten into the active life, there's probably lots of reasons, but I'd say 2 poles that I experience in my own life is, in order to come to love God like that, you have to spend a lot of time in his presence doing nothing, but listening to what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your mind, listening to the Spirit as he would speak to you. And I don't know about you Canadians, but we Americans, we're really impatient. And we do not like to sit around doing nothing because it makes us feel inadequate. We justify our lives by getting a lot of things done.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody says I'm justified by my works, but the feeling is that I'm not a good human being unless I'm out doing stuff. So we're afraid to spend that time alone. And part of the reason we're afraid of silence is because we start discovering things about ourselves.
True.
And the deeper we go, it's just like, it's horrific what we see going inside of us. Things we thought we were doing for a good motive, we realize, oh my gosh, I was really mostly kind of self-centered when I did that.
Right.
Or I have these really, you know, as a male, I have some of these really base desires when I see a woman. It's like, where did that come from? But to stop and meditate and go, you know, that happens to me. That's part of who you are, Mark Galli.
Yeah.
Be honest with yourself. So part of it is we don't want to spend time with God because we really don't want him to transform us. And the other thing is, I guess I've already said it, is that then we use activity to help us to stop thinking about all that.
Wow.
So part of my thesis in the book is we're afraid of God. To put it really boldly, I think we don't like God. A lot of the time we don't like God. I think if we're really honest with ourselves. I mean, there are days when I wake up and I think, okay, I want to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. It's enthusiastic. I commit myself to new goals. It's great. Other mornings I wake up and go, it is so hard to be a Christian.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a Christian today.
Yeah.
I wish God didn't exist today so that I could just live the life I want to live when I want to live it, how I want to live it. And I think we've got to come to the point of just saying to ourselves, that's who I am. I mean, I'm kind of preaching now, so sorry to just kind of go on and on here, but if grace means anything, it means that we can be completely and utterly honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
About ourselves.
Amen to that.
Because once we discover it, we've got to realize God knew this all along. It's no surprise to him that I'm a self-centered, lustful, greedy, unloving person many times, a lot of parts of the day. He knows that. Yeah. And yet he called me to be part of his church. He called me into ministry. He called me into journalism. He used a lot of the things I've done in my life for good. So anyway, that's sorry.
Yeah,
you're getting on a topic that I just love to preach on.
I think that's really insightful, though, because if I reflect on my own work, even as a pastor, I think a lot of the outward displays of my interior life, my outward displays actually mask the interior. My outward life can mask my interior life, and sometimes we busy ourselves with these outward displays of good works, like you say, almost as an attempt to quiet the inner voice that's saying the motivation behind this is wrong, what you want from this is wrong. You didn't actually do this from a position of walking in the Spirit, but you did this from a position where you've closed God off to this. You're doing this in your own strength, and we can really, in a sense, go back. We can go back to a place that we never started from. Christ is the author and perfecter of our faith, but sometimes we just let him start us off, and we feel like from there on we're running, we're doing our own thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that during the coronavirus, we've had an opportunity to be quiet and be still more than ever.
True say.
And what's interesting is that I think a lot of people are finding that really hard, really hard. And I will say, let's just say up front, it's a really scary thing to be with yourself like that and to be quiet and to be alone.
Yeah.
No wonder people are, glomming onto comedy and other entertaining videos on YouTube because it's just really hard to be alone by yourself.
Yeah.
This has been, now that we're coming out of it, it's been an opportunity. I don't know if I've taken advantage of it as much as I would have, but I will say, given the type of person I am, I've enjoyed it quite a bit.
Wow.
That's good.
Man, but thank you for those insights. Matt and I'd like to say, I don't know if you've ever heard it, if the Spirit's moving, sing another verse. Like if this is something you're passionate about sharing with a group of people or listeners, it's like, yeah, go get them, go hard. We want to hear what's on your heart.
Yeah.
But Mark, thinking about what you just said, and I appreciate your candidness in talking about your own examination of your heart and the strengths and the weaknesses you see there, which I know I can definitely relate to. I have moments where when I consider the trajectory of my life, it is much more up and down rather than a straight arrow up, if that makes sense. There's awesome days and weak days. And that kind of candidness, I think, is something that the church often feels a bit intimidated to acknowledge. But for many people who are outside the church or who are even growing up in the church, youth, young adults, and thinking about the prospect of making their faith their own, they sometimes can see these flaws in church, these priorities that are good, but the good things ultimately surpassing the ultimate things, the best things. And so when we honestly talk about these flaws that we see in the church, what would you say to the listener, especially to the younger listener who might be in high school or a young adult who, if they choose to follow Jesus, it's going to cost them? What would you say to that person who sees these flaws in the church to still say, no, it's worth it to pursue being a part of a body of believers and following Jesus Christ?
Well, I think the one thing the young people have that, I'm envious of, you tend to lose it as you get older, but I think it's a great trait, is they understand how the world should be and how the church should be. And they're really, as they discover that it isn't like that that in the church there are hypocrites, there are people who are not living a godly life, there are people who look like and talk like they're living a godly life, and they're really bad people in some ways. There are pastors who have affairs, there are treasurers who embezzle money. There are churches, I don't know how this affects Canada, but I know in the South there are still churches where prejudice against African Americans is pretty deeply woven into the church. And they're angry about that. They're frustrated about that. And that frustration and anger is actually a godly thing. It's a good thing. And I think one of the things you hope to hold on to, at least to some level, your whole life, as a sense of that this is really wrong, and this is not the way God wants it, and this has got to change. So there is part of that that's really righteous and good. My other notion, though, is good luck finding any institution or any group anywhere that in the end is going to not have people who are hypocrites, liars, greedy, selfish, mispractice sexual ethics. Basically, you're going to find that the church is really not better or not worse than any other human organization. But here's the difference. Christ calls us to be committed to that group of people. The people who are sinful, flawed, struggling in their faith, doubting, every once in a while doing something awesome for Jesus. That's the group that Jesus wants us to be committed to, because that's the group of people he died for.
Yeah.
And that's the group of people he put his brand on and keeps his brand on. The Church of Jesus Christ. We are, in America, and American evangelicals, we're ashamed of calling ourselves evangelical because of its association with Republican politics now. And then other parts of the world, people are ashamed to call themselves Christian because of one reason or another. Catholics are ashamed to call themselves Catholics because of the bishops' sexual, problems. Jesus Christ looks at all the churches that have all these problems and sins and says, I'm not taking my name off that.
Wow.
They're my people.
Yeah.
These are my people. They are a flawed bunch of sinners.
Yeah.
They're my people. And part of being a mature human being is to learn to live and to learn to love deeply flawed human beings.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the Christian faith is all about, is to love them as deeply as Christ loved us. And there's no better place to find flawed human beings than the Church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Wow. You pastors will know.
Yeah. Well, and ourselves being the, leading the charge on that front. I really appreciate you pointing that out, Mark, though, because, you've got a good point. I've felt those moments where I thought, man, there's some people in my church family that I'm like, I want to be associated with them, and other people that I'm like, I don't know them, even though I know them, and I think, like you touched on a broader spectrum, the church, especially the evangelical church, but actually probably the Catholic church as well, you could argue, is kind of having this crisis of identity among many young people. There is, you might see, for example, your example of the Catholic Church is spot on. Young people saying there's been these sexual abuses and we are angry. This is wrong. We question if we want to be associated with the Catholic Church, or in the United States, the example of, I have close friends whose parents feel very strongly, positively about, for example, the Republican Party and the leader, and who they feel that the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. And there's this tension of like, if this is who we are and this is what we've done as a community of worshiping believers, how do I actually fit in? How do I see myself as belonging to that? How have you kind of helped people navigate that tension? Because I'm sure you've interacted with young adults and youth and others who have said, man, I love Jesus, but I'm struggling with the church.
Yeah, it's just to keep on hammering home that point that Christ identifies himself so much with the church that he revealed to Paul that it is to be called the body of Christ. This is how Christ makes himself known in the world today. Yeah. And it's just so counterintuitive. We expect Christ to make himself known in the ideal and perfect community of people who are acting morally good 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And that isn't what he chose to do. Yeah. He chose to make himself known. Read the book of 1 Corinthians. Talk about a church that had moral and spiritual problems. Oh my gosh, jealousy and sexual shenanigans and rivalries. It was hardly the model church. And yet when Paul addressed it, he said to the church of Jesus Christ in Corinth, even though he had to chastise them, it doesn't mean we let it go. It doesn't mean we pretend like it's not a problem. We still have to address all these problems. I mean, one of the great things about the Catholic Church is, of course, they knew, a lot of people knew about it, but it took the Boston Globe, I think it was the Boston Globe, it was a paper in Boston that revealed the first instances of it. But I will say, I've just admired the way Catholics have stepped up to the plate and said, look, this is a serious problem. Yeah. And we need to know exactly what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and we've got to take steps that it never happen again. That's awesome. That is great. Okay. So that's what I'd keep on coming back to is, I mean, you discover this, one thing that helps you become more committed to the church is when you get married and you realize this person that you were in love with that you thought was perfect is hardly perfect. You're hardly a perfect husband.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you just have to look at each other and say, man, you've really blown it. I've really blown it. We got to figure out how to make this thing work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's getting through that period that really takes the marriage to a deeper level. And it's the same thing with the church. Angry, frustrated, preach at it, try to make it change, get disappointed, and stick through it.
Yeah.
There's something about your character that's going to be transformed when you do that.
Yeah. And that's where we see...
Go ahead, yeah.
And that's where we see Christ's forgiveness displayed so clearly. A church that is idyllic has no mark of Christ, has no mark of grace and mercy, no need. One of my favorite quotes from Bonhoeffer's Life Together is that God hates visionary dreamers. It makes one pretentious, and it actually puts on God a vision that is not his own, almost as though in a proud moment we say, my idea is better than yours. Out of that, I wonder if maybe in Western Christianity, do you think that we have like an over-realized eschatology of the kingdom of God being established on this earth now? Is holistic cultural revival something that's actually possible? And I mean, depending on your answer, what would a cultural revival look like today?
Yeah. Well, I'm on the more pessimistic side about that, although a lot of my friends really do think if we just try a little harder and get on the same page, we really can transform culture in significant ways. I've been on this planet for 67 years, and I'd say we've made some pretty amazing advances technologically as human beings and medically. But when it comes to people's relationship to one another, I'd have to say I think things are worse than ever. That could just be an old grumpy old man's view. The point being, there's a lot of talk in evangelical circles that I've been a part of in which we're to change the culture or transform the world or language like that.
Yeah.
I think we're setting ourselves up for huge failure when we do that, because I think human hardness of heart is it's not something we're going to, in a mass sort of way, make much progress in. Now, we can make a lot of progress more locally. there have been a lot of instances where churches have had revival because of the commitment of the Christians and the pastors in that church.
Yeah.
I think parents can make a big difference in their raising of their children. I think teenagers can make a big difference in relating to their friends. I think you can make a big difference in your local community, volunteering to teach kids after school and going to the food closet and organizing events that help one person or another. Mm-hmm. But when the larger the attempt at making the life better, the more complicated it's going to be, and the more unintended consequences that are going to erupt that just make it better for some people and worse for others. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem with every social reform movement, is they do some tremendous things to help change the life on the ground for some people, but it inevitably makes life harder for other people. So, right. So there are exceptions to that rule. Obviously, the ending of slavery in America in the 1865 was a great thing. Mm. Of course, it costs hundreds of thousands of American lives to make it happen. Mm-hmm. That wasn't a great thing. Then the mothers and the fathers who lost all their children or husbands. Mm-hmm. And then they, in a sense, the shell shock that America experienced for the decades after that, just battle-weary men trying to run a country, mm-hmm. was devastating. So anyway, I'm skeptical about the realized eschatology, and I really do. But I do take a lot of hope in the Bible's eschatological view. I mean, in reading the Psalms and the Gospels, it's absolutely clear we have no reason to, even though we might be pessimistic about world or cultural change in any big way right now, mm-hmm. that doesn't mean we walk around with a dour face. We have been given a message that Christ will make all things new. Mm-hmm. We can take that to the bank. That's a great promise, and there's no reason for us to be dour, pessimistic, cynical, negative. We can just look at the world and say, it is a mess. I don't know how much better it's going to get better morally or spiritually. But Christ can help people right now, and Christ mm-hmm. will bring in a new kingdom eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that starts, like you said, it's as a parent to reform your household, as an individual to reform your heart, to reform your mind. I think that's an amazing place to start, where usually people start with, my leader is going to change my country. Yeah. This program is going to change my city. Instead of dealing with the human heart, which is so deceitful and has so many different aims that are contrary to reform. That's really helpful.
Who's the Canadian, Peterson? What's his first name?
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan, yeah. Jordan. He says, if you want to change the world, start by straightening your room.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really good advice.
Yeah.
To change the world, start by, for me, loving my wife.
Right.
Serving my wife.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing to do some days.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Again, it's not the only thing you do, but it's a good training ground for serving everybody else.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great.
When we speak about our own hearts, Mark, I appreciate your insights on church and culture, and kind of want to pivot a little bit with you to consider what it looks like for us to talk about encountering God, that place that we touched on earlier of really, firstly, if you will, coming to Jesus to get Jesus, not firstly to say, okay, now I'm going to go and transform culture in this way, though there's valuable motives in that, but to firstly just say, like, I'm coming to God for who he is, to delight in that, to be in his presence, and realizing that's the most worthwhile thing I can do with my time, is to know and love God more intimately and deeply. And so I'm intrigued to know, in your own faith journey, is there a time in your life that you can point to pretty specifically in which you discovered that you wanted to deeply know and enjoy God?
Yeah, probably about, time flies when you're having fun. I would say 10 to 15 years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd been in after I became a journalist, and we moved to Illinois, and I had been reading the Book of Common Prayer, which is the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer, and I became an Episcopalian at that point. And then there was a church split over human sexuality issues. We ended up going to another breakaway church, Anglican church, that was charismatic in its tone and flavor. Very, very low key, though. No speaking in tongues during the service. I mean, you had to go there many weeks before you discovered that there were people who spoke in tongues. There was healing. You know, people prayed for healing and that sort of thing. And that just set me on as a left brain at the time, up to then a Presbyterian person interested in theology. It was kind of an opening to, there's another part of me. I'm supposed to love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I'm doing this mind pretty good. Strength is okay. I get an A in the mind. I'll give myself a B. But when it comes to heart and soul, C minus at best, you know, maybe a D. So I began to do more reading in that and spend more time praying. I started to practice contemplative prayer. I know there's a tremendous amount of suspicion about contemplative prayer, and it is, contemplative prayer is misused, has been misused and led people astray. But there is a stream of contemplative prayer in which you just sit in the presence of God, try to have everything leave your mind, and just so you can, in a sense, be open to Him and His Spirit and what He's doing to you. There's an orthodox biblical way of doing that, I think. And I had some pretty extraordinary moments. Now, I will say, what I learned during that period was that even though some of those came upon me, I figured out ways actually to manipulate my spirit so that I could make them happen, which made me think, all right, you have to realize that those aren't the be all and end all of being a Christian, because you kind of fake them.
Yeah.
You can kind of fake them for yourself and with other people. And if they come, great. But if they don't make them happen. Don't force it. So that was a kind of an opening for me, that there is this other dimension that I can be pursuing. And some of it comes through contemplative prayer. In the last few years, though, I've been doing what I mentioned earlier, and that is trying to, because I'm a pretty active person. Also, I'm not a person who reads my Bible and prays 5 hours a day. I have morning prayer, and then I've got things to do to justify my life. But no, I mean, I do a lot of things. But I've realized I am not really, there are people who are gifted with contemplative prayer and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's like people who are gifted with evangelism, just are extraordinary. I try to share the faith when I have the opportunity, but I don't have a gift of evangelism, and I don't have the gift of contemplation either. Once in a while I enter into it, and it's wonderful. But I am a typically active American Christian. And what I've been trying to do is this habit of framing everything I do in the context of Christ's grace, mercy, and love. Oh. Again, it might be as simple as when I sit down, I can't do this now, but when I used to go to a baseball game and just see this mass of people there, just realizing I harken back to the feeding of the 5,000 when there were a mass of people there, and Christ's love for every one of them. And every one of them has a journey that they're on toward God, whether they know it or not. Yeah. Either toward God or away from God. Yeah. To realize every time I encounter a person, they're on a journey toward God or away from God, and I can help them at some level, even if God's name never comes up. So for me, that it's the day-to-day framing of my, trying to teach myself to frame my day with Christ Christ being the frame of the day. Now, I should say, I actually don't think God wants us to do that all that often. And what I mean is this: if I get on a plane and the pilot's a devout Christian, to be honest, I don't want him praying while he's doing his job. I don't want him to go off and do a contemplative moment. I actually want him to forget about God for a while. I think the most responsible and loving thing he can do when he's in that cockpit is for him to think about what he needs to do to get that plane off the ground and to land it safely. If God never enters his mind, that's the most godly thing that he can do at that moment. So I don't mean to say every moment of the day, Brother Lawrence is practicing the presence. I don't think that's a 24/7 thing. I think that's, as I said, punctuates the day. And then once it's punctuated, you go on to focus on what you're supposed to do, whether it's painting a room, taking your wife on a trip.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Fair.
Interesting. To kind of run back to the experience that you first had when you entered into that contemplative prayer and you felt like heart and soul became real for you in your relationship with God. How do you distinguish that from what you've written in your book? You wrote, "In our desire for transformation, God is a means to an end. That's not love of God, that's love of self." And I say this because for a lot of us, when we think of, contemplative moments where God speaks to us and we really feel like his spirit is moving, a lot of the times that, we go to God to get that feeling.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's the difference for you between worshiping God, living for God, loving God with our heart and soul, and a yearning for an experience that we can kind of say, that's my check mark for the year. I met with God, time to live my life.
Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, I was grateful and I continue to be grateful for any experience I have for that. But what I've done, I've deliberately shaped my life so I'm not actually seeking those out. And I'm actually a little suspicious when I'm in places when it seems to be that's what is being manipulated at that moment.
Yeah.
Because I think we really should be, even though, okay, this is going to sound contradictory. So I'm not saying I'm a completely consistent person, okay? But I think more often than not, we ought to be suspicious of our feelings. Now they're God-given, they're gifts to us. And when we do have extraordinary moments with God, we should be grateful and thankful. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we should be designing our worship services. I don't think we should be designing our personal prayer times so that they can elicit an experience. Mm-hmm. Those all should be focused on what does it mean to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And it usually means reading the scripture, even when you don't feel like it, and reading the Psalms, especially for prayers of praise and both everything from praise to lament. Mm-hmm. It means organizing worship services so the focus is God and his glory first and foremost, and our feelings about that second. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, I feel sorry for pastors today, especially pastors of independent churches, because there is now an expectation in the land that I need to be inspired before I leave this worship service. Mm. Worship service, if it's not like a spiritual pep rally for Jesus, the pastor's not doing his job. Hmm. The church is dead. That's the other thing. Yeah. The church is dead. It's like, oh my gosh, what pressure for the pastor, and the music leader, because it's really kind of the music leader whose job it is to get people riled up for Jesus. Hmm. So they walk out all enthused. Hmm. Well, some services are going to be like that. That's great. Yeah. But I think, I've been a part of a church for years that the arc of the service it's absolutely clear what's going on. Every single service is there. Opening, bursting songs of praise. Then we're quiet and we think and we meditate. We listen to the word, and then there's communion. And then the communion songs take us to this new plateau so that when the service ends, we're at the height of emotional enthusiasm. I just think some services should go like that. Yeah. Definitely. But every single service, I think we're basically teaching, okay, forgive me for being kind of harsh here, but I just think we're feeding people a drug. It's like we're getting people that religion is like a drug. You can have spiritual highs with it if you just do all the right things with the right people. And unfortunately, the spiritual life is also the Garden of Gethsemane. Yeah. The spiritual life is also Paul in prison. Mm-hmm. Spiritual life is also the lament of the Psalms, who feels like God has deserted him. Yeah,
true.
The arc of the Christian life is really varied, and that the most interesting thing about it is it's in the lowest spots. It's in the most miserable spots where Christ makes himself most known, when he's hanging on a cross and we're hanging next to him.
Yeah.
But that really goes against the grain, certainly, of American Christianity.
The call to participate in the sufferings of Christ.
And just let them happen. I'm terrible at that. Oh my gosh, when I'm feeling depressed, I will eat, I will watch TV, I'll do anything to get rid of the depression instead of just living with it. Instead of just saying, okay, there's something here that Christ wants me to learn.
Yeah.
I don't want to learn right now, Jesus. Thank you very much. But that's my learning curve right now.
Yeah.
Can I, when I'm feeling down and alone, do I have to go back to my age-old habits of trying to solve it and mask it? Or can I use that as a time for prayer? That's a huge challenge for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the midst of suffering, can we invite God into that space and to occupy that space with us? Wow. Yeah, well said.
And just sitting there and living with that feeling. Wow, that is hard. Man, that is hard.
Yeah. Wow, knowing that in the journey of that, God understands. Yeah.
And that he's there in some way, that he's not there in other ways, other times. To find him there, to figure out a way to find him there, or allow himself to reveal himself to us. Probably the better way to put it theologically.
Not always a way out of the suffering, but sometimes a way into greater intimacy with him through the suffering.
Yeah. That's the thing we have to recognize. We talk about the attributes of God. He's omniscient, he's omnipresent, he's loving, he's forgiving, he's merciful, he's powerful, he's glorious. Here's what here's what God revealed to us in Jesus Christ. God is also a God who, at some level, suffers. Now, I know theologically, we could talk about what do we mean by that, because there is obviously a theological doctrine that says God cannot suffer.
Sure.
But there's something about the revelation of Jesus Christ that says he is to be known. If we want to know all of God's attributes, we have to know suffering. Because God has experienced suffering in Jesus
At the
Christ.
very least, we can see that as far as our anthropology, what we understand about what it means to be human, Jesus as the perfect human shows us that to be human is to suffer. And I think in that, for sure. And that, like you say, allows us to engage in new life, the life of God. It's in every way, it is the entrance to Christianity, to give up self. That's what I love about that quote is that you're saying that our experience of God transformation should not be the love of self. It should be the love of God. It's laying down the self in order to pick up a cross and to follow Christ. That's great.
Wow.
Thank you.
Mark, can I just ask off that? Do you ever feel like the posture of evangelicals towards self-sacrifice and power is one that's actually terrified of that prospect of laying down the self?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's not just evangelicals. Every human being's terrified of being. Actually, we do. There's a part of us that wants to be transformed. And that's why one church I went to talked about, it was a sanctuary of transformation, and people would come because they were tired of who they were and they wanted to be transformed.
Right.
But like any alcoholic who discovers, I want to give up drinking. Well, this is what it's going to be like, and this is what it's going to feel like if you do that. Well, maybe I'll drop drinking next year. So we're all terrified of transformation, even though we yearn for it. It's just one of the great paradoxes of human life. We yearn, we just die, we're dying to change, and yet when push comes to shove, we also don't want it. So,
man, thank goodness we have a God who's willing by his Spirit to journey with us into those messy places.
It's amazing that God is so patient with us in that. That is just like stunning to me. That doesn't he have better things to do with his time? I'm sure in some ways he does, but he chooses to make us like, human life, the pinnacle, not the pinnacle, but the priority of, his work and his love. So,
man. I so respect that.
That's the thing. Again, as I say, there's no reason we can't talk about this and go into depth about it, because it's grounded. We can only do it. In fact, if we didn't believe in the grace and mercy of God, we would dare not do it.
For sure.
If we didn't believe in that, we'd think, oh my gosh, if I admit that, it's over. And what the gospel is that we admit that, and life can really begin now.
Yeah.
Yeah. The beautiful power of honesty in the face of our own weakness and the reality that, we don't have it all together. And we're following Jesus less because we know what that looks like perfectly, and more because we realize he's the answer. So, man,
Yeah.
Mark, there's so many questions I'd want to continue asking off of our time already together, but this has been a super beneficial conversation. And before we close our time together, just wanted to underscore, I know we've touched on this a little bit already through this conversation, but your most recent book, which if you're watching this video stream, you can just see it here. Hopefully the glare doesn't kill it. But it's When Did We Start Forgetting God by Mark Galli. Galli is Galli. And Mark really dives into more depth into a lot of the topics that we've touched on today. Mark, anything you want to say briefly about that book before we conclude our time together?
Yeah, I would just emphasize that it's the first step for me in a lot of ways of thinking about all this more deeply. And I just don't want to give anyone the impression of that, all you have forgot about God, but I certainly haven't.
Yeah. Fair, yeah.
I did spend the last half of the book exploring different ways in which we can begin to nurture our love and a passion for God.
Excellent.
But I just have to say that those are baby steps, and I'd say I know 10% of what that's about, maybe, and I still have a ton. I'm learning every day how inadequate I am at that, and how much more there is to learn. So I would really be sorry if people look to me as someone who's got his act together on this point.
Well, kudos to you for stepping forward and starting to blaze the trail in that conversation, because I think it's an important one. Mark, where could our listeners learn more about you, whether that's places to connect online or otherwise?
Yes. Well, I publish a weekly newsletter called the Galli Report, and I feature links to articles I find interesting, make comments on them, and if that sort of thing might interest you, might want to just try it. So you go to I don't know where you'd go to find that exactly directly. So the best place to go would start with markgalli.com, which is my website, and from there you'll see a link to the newsletter. But and then I do have this website that I will periodically. I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be writing now that I'm retired from Christianity Today. And so I was hoping to write one article a week, something along this line, developing some ideas from the book. So I hope to do that there. So that would be a place to go. And then, of course, I have a Twitter account, Mark Galli. But again, I'm mostly using that to listen to what other people are doing and saying and thinking. And once in a while, I post something there that says, I posted something really great by Ron Sider, for example, a couple weeks ago. So if I find something, I rarely say something myself there, or I'm saying it less and less, because Twitter's just a really terrible place to say anything significant or interesting.
Isn't that the truth?
I was going to say, you got to put a helmet on first.
It's a firestorm.
But it is, if you want to find out what people are thinking and talking about, that's the place you can go. It's the marketplace. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Mark, we have been really fortunate to have this time with you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to run these questions by you, to hear your thoughts on some significant things about church, culture, and personally encountering God. It's been really awesome to have you with us.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been an honor. I appreciate when anyone's interested in what I have to write. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.